Also, good morning in some places across the country. I think I know most of you. My name is Ann Lenahan. I used to work for the Head Start office for a while, and now I am doing some consulting with NHSA, and I am really excited to be part of this really important webinar. And I am going to punt to the Executive Director of NHSA, Yasmina, help kick us off today.
Thank you, Anne. And I hope you are staying safe in the path of the hurricane, and also thinking of all of our programs in Florida who are really probably bracing for it all. We really pray that that all of our impacted people in the impacted area be safe. We're just going to record this program because we're realizing that programs that are not able to attend will be able to then download the session. This is a really important session. We are so aware that it's a real challenging time for local programs who are facing many, many critical decisions as they grapple with spending the 3 one-time COVID supplements. This coupled with under-enrollment, which is fueled by the compensation crisis of the workforce. So we think this is really going to be a very helpful session. Over the past several months, you have seen Heather Wanderski, OHS Director of Program Operation, who has joined NHSA virtually several times on our Monday stand-up calls, and most recently in person in July and during the fall leadership last week. Her straight talk and clarity makes a huge difference to our program leaders and managers. And I'm just going to digress for a second and tell Heather that I've been looking forward to meeting her since many, many years ago when I was in Illinois, and folks, the directors there were saying the only person who really knows what's going on in Region 5 office is Heather Wanderski. And I was like, oh, gotta meet her. Delighted that Heather is now with OHS. So all that knowledge and all that really ability to communicate it and get us the information is now common. And Heather, thank you for joining us today. We're also today fortunate to have Stephanie Gordon. Stephanie oversees all the Head Start fiscal and grant activities across all regional offices, and she's joining Heather. So this dynamic duo will take us through many procedures and timelines that programs need to be mindful of as they make tough and brave decisions over the next 12 months. We are really looking to help programs make tough and brave decisions. We often hear from programs that they receive inconsistent guidance from regional offices, and even within the same regional office, the different specialists would have different interpretations. So our goal today is to hear from the authoritative leadership so that we bring clarity and transparency to critical procedures and timelines, which are and should be consistently applied to all programs across all regions. And we do understand that managing a national program across 12 regions is a daunting task, and the differences and/or inconsistency can occur. So today we have a wonderful opportunity to set the record straight. So we're grateful that Heather and Stephanie are willing to join us today in an effort to ensure that local programs are being treated equitably and that the procedures and processes that regions undertake are transparent. Over to you, Anne.
Okay. Well, that's a great kickoff, and I just have a couple of housekeeping items. I'm cutting folks off at the pass because I know they'll be asking. The presentation is being recorded, and you will receive an email in a couple of days with making the presentation and the slide deck available to you. I also want to say, and I think you all know this, well, first of all, we welcome your questions and comments. Thirdly, this is not a forum where we're going to be able to resolve any individual specific grantee requests or issues, but Heather and Stephanie are committed to following up after the webinar if there are individual concerns or comments made that really warrant a follow-up, and they're happy to do that. We also know that sometimes when the feds are on, sometimes people are just reluctant to put something in the chat or to ask a question. We want to get all the questions out. So if anyone is uncomfortable, but they really have something that they want to be said, Tommy's on the line, Dr. B's on the line, I'm on the line. You could just send it to us directly in chat, and so we can surface whatever the issue is. So I know we only have 90 minutes, so I am going to turn it over immediately to Heather and Stephanie. And thank you.
Wow, thank you, Anne and Yasmina. Those were some really, really nice, thoughtful words and a great introduction. I want to say that, interestingly, I think, just to acknowledge some of what you referenced already, is that I think the human element is always a factor and a challenge when you have such a large workforce and such a huge program in the Office of Head Start. And it's not just the Office of Head Start, it's also the Office of Grants Management. So Stephanie's got her own workforce, and we work together within the regional offices. So you look at them as a regional office, but we're actually two different groups of staff that we're trying to consistently get the messaging out. One of the things that I will say, is that hopefully we have the opportunity to have some of our regional program managers and our grants management officers join us. We did actually invite them to listen in as part of this session too, so that we can continue to maintain our level of consistency across the regions, within the regions, as we continue to communicate out the information that we're sharing today, so that we're all consistent and we're all getting the same messaging and that we're being very clear with everyone. So I think it's important, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to set the record straight, as our title denotes, and being able to do that. So just thank you guys so much. Not sure if Stephanie wanted to give any opening remarks, but I mean, that's, I think, really something important that I wanted to share with folks before we get started.
Oh, thank you, Heather. I do. I concur with everything you said, and I appreciate, bringing to the forefront that, OHS and OGM are two separate entities with sometimes, two sets of priorities, and, working in a regional office and marrying them, brings these, unique challenges that we're, trying to always improve upon and develop further.
All right. Well, we do have quite a bit of topics that we want to share and talk about today. So we're piecing them out in different sections throughout the session today. We'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. I know, if you have questions in chat, we'll feed us after each section, and then we'll have some time at the end as well, as Anne mentioned. So I think we can start off with the first of I think 5 different topics that we want to talk about today. The first is the fiscal and administrative flexibilities. So I know we are regularly getting questions on this particular information memorandum. It's our updated coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 fiscal and administrative flexibilities. And, I will say that over the course of the pandemic, we've had the opportunity to update this periodically. And what I will say is many actually of the provisions in the document itself now have expired. There are still some that are applicable to our recipients, and I wanted to specifically highlight those because they are still available, and I want to make sure that people are clear on, and if there is a time frame where a provision has expired, it will be clear in that information memorandum. Like, it's only, like, this provision is only good through, let's say, December 31st, 2021. Well, if that's the case, then you'll know we've already passed that date and that provision is no longer in effect. But the ones that are still in existence are the ones that do not have a date specified. And so a few of them are, one is around the exemption of certain procurement requirements. So the Office of Head Start will waive procurement requirements related to geographic preferences, but that essentially recipients just need to make sure that you maintain appropriate records and documentation to support any charges that are made against a federal award. So not a lot of action needs to happen there, except for recipients need to be able to maintain appropriate records and documentation. The second is around the extension of financial and other reporting requirements. So recipients can ask to delay submission of financial performance and other reports for up to a 3-month period of time beyond the normal due dates. And essentially, you can continue to operate without any issues during the period of extension. One thing I will say is that there is one caveat to that, is that we will not be able to extend the monthly enrollment reports that we ask for, as well as anything related to a transition activity that's happening as a result of the designation renewal system. So those are the two periods or issues where we would not be able to extend financial and other reports, but otherwise recipients can ask for those extensions. The other piece in the information memorandum that I want to make sure that we highlight is around waivers and other flexibilities. So particularly around the governing body approvals. So at the start of the pandemic, it was really difficult for many recipient organizations to secure approvals for applications and other actions, because there may have been provisions in bylaws that say, you have to have a quorum and maybe you're only allowed to meet in person. And that was creating a barrier to be able to get the work done. Hopefully most organizations have worked through those challenges at this point, but the flexibility still exists that minimally a statement must be submitted confirming that the governing body and policy council members who are available for contact have given their permission for an approval for those applications that you submit or other post-award amendments that we'll be covering a lot about today. So that still exists and right now. The other one is around non-federal match waivers. So the Office of Head Start provided maximum flexibility for requesting a non-federal match waiver, and has noted that if you are asking for funds within an application, whether it be a supplement like a COLA quality application or your continuation application, whatever that application looks like, if you place either a reduced amount or $0 on your 424 and your 424A, that essentially constitutes a waiver. And so we've been very generous in granting those waiver requests. And as long as you continue to do that, that provision still remains in effect. There are, the other thing I want to highlight here is the prior approval waiver requirements. And so there are a couple of opportunities by which recipients can ask for or make revisions to their grants, as long as they're responding, as long as the purpose is in response to COVID. There are some additional flexibilities that we have to offer. The first is around prior approval for the purchase of equipment. So in instances where a recipient is looking to purchase equipment in response to COVID, you can actually purchase equipment up to $25,000 without requesting regional office approval. The second is around budget modifications. So right now the requirement is that you can move funds between object class categories for 25% of your total budget or up to $250,000, whichever is the lesser of the amounts. But if you're needing to make modifications in response to COVID, and you can document that it's in support of that purpose, then you can actually move funds between object class categories up to $1 million without securing prior approval from the regional office. And then the third and final is around procurement by non-competitive processes. So you can engage in sole source purchasing to obtain your needed goods and services. Again, has to be specifically tied to your COVID response and recovery efforts around that. So those are the things that I wanted to make sure that I specifically highlighted, since a lot of recipients have questions. And again, those are only in effect, those particular prior approval waiver requirements are only specific to COVID. If, let's say, you are purchasing an item of equipment or something that's not specifically related to COVID, but just ongoing operational expenses, then you would need to follow the more traditional route. Like, let's say you're purchasing a vision screener, then and that's an item of equipment that's greater than $5,000, it would go through the normal process of requesting a budget revision application. So the actual provisions in that information memorandum are actually tied to the public health emergency. And this is where I think people get a little unsure about whether these are still in effect. So back at the start of the pandemic, the secretary created or started the public health emergency. And once declared, that emergency declaration remains in effect for 90 days and it can be extended. It has been consistently extended every 90 days up through until the most recent extension, which was July 15th, which takes us now to October 13th. And so what I will say is that these provisions that you have here in the information memorandum are good until October the 13th. If the public health emergency declaration is not extended, then those provisions go away. You would have to then resort back to, things like governing body approvals, things like your budget revisions, your request for non-federal match waivers. You'd have to go back to all of the regulations that are in effect, and the actual flexibilities would be lifted. But I will say, interestingly, there was, I want to say it was last year, not a promise or a guarantee, but kind of an agreement that the secretary would notify state governors within giving them a 60-day notice if the public health emergency would not be extended. So because we're less than 60 days out before the end of the period and we have not been notified that there won't be an extension, we're operating as if we anticipate there will be another 90-day extension. So we're probably looking at sometime in 2023 that we would get extended again. But again, of course, if anything changes to that impact, like the Office of Head Start would certainly be looking out and making sure that we notify our recipients quickly in the event that anything changes to that declaration. So with that, I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions around this particular topic.
Heather, I actually have two that came in from the field, and actually I'm so glad that they asked these. And again, it's going back to the non-federal share waiver.
Mm-hmm.
So I think folks are hearing you and saying, oh heavens, we could have been zero and we didn't. So if they recently submitted a refunding app or a COLA app and did not put in zero, can they simply go back and revise that instead of having to request a waiver? And can they do it without a narrative justification?
Unfortunately, they cannot. It's only when you're asking for new funds. If you already have the existing match on an application, the only way that we can to go back and approve a waiver then is to be able to go through our more typical budget revision application, which again, you'd write, I think we're being very flexible on, the justifications and things, but yeah, you would have to tie it back to the Head Start Act and what's allowable and what you can tie it to for your justification and your narrative. And you'd have to specify like how much are you asking to be waived, because at this point, the match is already on the award. So you have to specify how much you want to be removed. You can't just submit a budget revision that says zero, because we don't understand what that means. Like it's match that's already tied to the award.
So what if it's an application that was submitted that is not yet been cut? The application's in, but the grant is still pending. Let's say it's a 10-1 grantee or an 11-1 grantee.
I think that they should be in communication with their program and grant specialist to find out where we are in process with a particular application. If we do have the ability to go back, and if they are anticipating, and I know Stephanie's going to talk about this a little bit later, the time that they realize that they're not going to be able to meet the match requirement is the time in which they should be asking for the waiver. So if they're anticipating right now that they're not, and they're projecting that they're not going to be able to meet that, now is the time to really raise that forward. And if there's an ability to make an adjustment to the application, then we certainly want to make sure that we capture that.
I think there's one other question not related to non-federal share. Can you repeat the budget revision amount when not due to COVID?
And so Stephanie, make sure I'm clear on this, or that I spoke correctly. Like if it's not related to COVID, then you can move money between object class categories up to 25% of your total budget, or $250,000. The lesser of the two.
Yes, so that's correct. And I'll talk about that later, but sometimes there are two different standards. We have one in the uniform guidance that talks about that 10% of the simplified acquisition threshold at that 100,000. But because OHS also in its terms and conditions is governed by the grants policy statement, as Heather said, we adopt the higher threshold of the $250,000 or 25%. And that's moving between object class categories. So that's when you look at your notice of award and you look at I think it's box 33 these days. I'm not as familiar with our new NOAA, but on box 33, you look at those line items, and that's what Heather means by object class category.
So Stephanie, we have a question for you. And what if you have a regional fiscal officer, grant specialist that just won't accept a continuation grant with a request for a waiver for non-federal share? I think this is one of the things that we do hear is inconsistent across regions, but I felt like Heather has said something different.
Well, what Heather's saying is correct. Due to the flexibilities, each grant specialist, each grants management officer in the region should be accepting what is placed in box C of the 424A. So if a recipient has put 0, due to the fiscal flexibilities that Heather has just presented, we would be accepting that 0. If the flexibilities, change, maybe we might have different things to discuss, but at this time, everyone should be accepting it. So if your grants management specialist is not accepting it, I would reach out to your grants management officer to ensure that they are following the proper information available.
We appreciate it. I think there's one other question in this section, and tell us, because we need to get to the other sections, I know. Will the IM that describes allowable COVID costs, use of ARP and CARES funding, be our guidance for expenditures that would fall under the category of fiscal flexibilities you've described?
Sorry, Anne, you were breaking up a little bit.
It's in chat.
Yeah, it's in chat? Okay, let me check here. So will the information memorandum that describes allowable COVID costs be our guidance for expenditures that would fall under the category of the fiscal flexibilities that you've described? Yeah, so use of the ARP, those are just general examples. We don't have an exhaustive list of allowable expenditures. It's really about being able to think about your response to COVID and things, and making sure that you're considering all of the cost principles as it relates to your purchases and expenditures. But yeah, so another question popped in. So we can buy equipment for $25,000 and not get permission from Office of Head Start. Yes, but it has to be specifically tied to your, response and recovery for COVID. You have to be able to demonstrate that. Otherwise, it falls back under your normal operating procedures, and then it would be $5,000 for equipment that you could buy up to without securing prior approval.
I just piggyback on that and say the recipient needs to be confident in making that argument to the auditors, to review teams, because yes, you would have that ability to go up to the 25,000, but if you're uncomfortable and not willing to defend your case and document your case, then you might find yourself in a pickle. So as Heather's saying, really document everything you're doing and really believe in what you're doing. Are we taking more questions? Or are we moving on?
I think we can move on.
Okay, great. Thanks. So 1303 applications. I know that this is what we call them, but really what it references is 45 CFR Part 1303, which is found in Subpart E, facilities. And this subpart gives us the information on how a recipient is eligible to purchase, construct, and renovate facilities. Please note that the subpart generally applies to major renovations and not minor renovations, unless those minor renovations are part of a purchase application. So I think I was going to kick it over to Heather for phase 1, and I'll take phase 2 and 3.
Sure.
Great.
So, I think overall, we wanted to be able to show everyone just generally how the overall process works for supplemental funding requests related to facilities. So the first phase generally is a lot of, I think back and forth discussion, planning, preliminary eligibility discussion. So in phase 1, what we do is generally a recipient will come to the Office of Head Start and say, hey, I'm interested in a facility project, want to have some initial discussions, see what you guys think about it, and just really have those, initial conversations. So in phase 1, we meet with the recipient, we talk about the scope of the project, we cover the application process, and we talk a lot about pre-eligibility funding, like for reasonable expenses. Like, let's say we agree, and maybe you need funds to support the cost of an appraisal, of phase 1 environmental assessment, all the different components that make up that 1303 application. We would meet and we talk about it. During this phase 1, we talk about the community assessment, your enrollment information, where will the facility be located, what's the need for your community, and this conversation generally includes your program specialist, your grant specialist. We also have within each regional office a facilities consultant that is there to also help support the conversation. And we talk and walk through all the regulations and what is applicable depending on what your situation entails, what will be required based on what's being proposed within the application. So that's kind of generally what phase 1 looks like.
Great, and then we move on to phase 2. And phase 2 is when you have an application that meets the requirements of 45 CFR 1303, 44, and 45. You submit it via the HSES application amendment. We do have specific 1303 amendments these days, so pay attention to selecting the proper one. And what's good about that amendment is it takes the performance standards and the checklists that are used, and it gives you the ability to upload to each of those items. So it makes it easier for yourself to make sure you have a more complete application, and it also helps with the regional office review. So the review at that point includes a full assessment of the application narrative. And as Heather mentioned, at that point, we're really looking to make sure that these pre-application concerns are addressed. We're looking at the budget and the project costs, the environmental phase 1, and the appraisal reports. So we wanted to note that during the process, the application may be returned. A return is not a rejection in HSES. We're simply indicating that revisions are needed as a result of the ongoing negotiations to enter into this grand facility project. So if the regional office believes that the 1303 is approvable, OGM at that point, so as we talked about, we have some, we work very well together, but we also have sometimes some very separate roles. And one of those separate roles, OGM, will begin its request for the standard form 429B and or 429C. And those are submitted through the online data collection system, OLDC, which is a module in Grant Solutions. So also at that point, that may get returned to you. And it again is not a rejection. We are simply just maybe saying that the form needs to be, completed differently. We're indicating that revisions may be needed. So if you need more information on this, it's in Program Instruction 1703. And we actually do have grantee guides to fill out all of our SF429 forms. You can find them in the help section of Grant Solutions. or you can also reach out to your fiscal or grant specialist. They should be able to give it to you. So we enter into phase 3. And in certain circumstances, regional OHS and OGM will not be able to make the approval at their level. It will have to go beyond that RPM and grants officer. So these are unique requests that traditionally take longer than 30 days to approve. And the reason is these are not only unique, they're more complex traditionally. And that's because in these cases, the federal interest may in this circumstance be being, I didn't want to say be being, conveyed, transferred, assigned, mortgaged, leased, or otherwise encumbered or subordinated by the recipient. So that requires prior approval outside of just the regional office. If you're making a one-time request that is in excess of $250,000, that is also going to have to be approved at a level beyond your regional office. And the third one I just wanted to mention was an extension that goes beyond 12 months. So with many different grant capabilities of extensions, but if you're ever seeking an extension that takes your original project period out more than 12 months, that is also made beyond, that decision will be approved outside the regional office. I just warn because I think we're seeing more and more extensions coming in due to the many different complicated circumstances we're experiencing during this time. So I just wanted to mention that sometimes your grants or program specialists may say phase 3 is a deviation. And that's because that's the working term that we use here at HHS. And really what a deviation is it is a grants policy term that says you want to changes are sought at various times throughout the life cycle of a grant award, or if multiple exceptions or deviations are sought for the same application. Excuse me. So HHS will utilize this when there is a bona fide need to deviate from regulations or policies to carry out programmatic purposes and protect the interest of the federal government. But we can't use it to override statutory requirements. So on our next slide, we actually really like this chart because it shows you what Heather just explained in phase 1 is really that first bubble. And then when we look at phase 2, we can see that maybe after phase 2, you can, get the recipient approval at that time, or you'll be going into phase 3, which are those factors outside the regional office, and then hopefully getting to a point of approval. So we've outlined some timeframes here at the bottom where an expectation phase 1, can take 30 to 90 days. We're looking at that phase 2 probably being the longest part of the process, about 4 to 6 months. We're looking at 30 to 60 days if it hits phase 3. Heather, I saw you come off mute. Do you want to add something to that or clarify?
Yeah, no, I definitely did, because I'm sure some recipients who may have gone through the process before or are going through the process now are looking at these timelines and say, gosh, that may or may not be my experience. And I think it really depends on, these are meant to be averages, not meant to say this is hard and fast. It really depends on the level of complexity or simpleness of a request. If it is, I think, something which doesn't have to go through the phase 3 process and funds have already been awarded, but maybe there's a special condition on the award. And it's, maybe an experienced recipient who has gone through the 1303 application process, you may see it actually get approved in much shorter periods of time. If it is much more complicated, as you mentioned, Stephanie, that it requires an encumbrance, or where maybe whereby we're looking to secure a mortgage, and then we've got lenders involved, and we've got general counsel involved, and it just requires a much further length of time that recipients may just question in looking at this overall timeline. But I think that these are meant to be more averages.
Yeah, that's a good point too. When we talk about outside the regional office, as Heather mentioned, one of our partners is Office of General Counsel. We're also partnering with our Office of Grants Policy, Leadership and Office of Administration, and then some of them even go all the way up to the Assistant Secretary. So there are a lot of people involved in the process.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So when you're ready for questions, let us know. And I knew that this would be a topic where we would get some interesting questions. And
We have one more slide. Heather, do you want to just jump to the questions, or do we want to? Okay, let's jump to the
No,
questions.
I mean, I think probably some of the questions are about like, where are we, where are there complications with applications? So I think it would be helpful to kind of just generally see the overall scope of the applications that we have in process nationally, and like what we're seeing as trends.
Okay, so this slide was, we got this from, as Heather mentioned, of our real property facility interest team. And this is their data as of August 30th, 2022. And it looks like we have 6 1303 applications pending funding approval. We have 7 waiting for the deviation process to complete. Phase 1, as Heather described, there are 16. Returned to the recipient by the regional office. So that means you're probably working in phase 2 at this point. We have 24, and under review in the regional office, probably also at like that phase 2, you're looking at about 36. And then over on the other side of the slide, we were coming up with the main reasons they might be in that return status. So it's interesting. 2 of these, we have, our internal checklist, which is very similar to your external checklist. And 2 of these are program responsibilities, and 2 of these are grants responsibilities. So the 2 that fall to my team are those cost estimates and cost comparison. A lot of times, I think a recipient creates an idea that they're really satisfied with, and then does their cost comparison backing into telling us why their original idea is the best idea. What we are looking for you to really do is really explore all the options that are potentially available. We've talked about purchases. We've talked about major renovations. We talked about leases. Maybe I didn't talk about leases, but we have those options for certain types of leases. There are many avenues available to you, in 1303. And we really want you to explore the costs associated with each project to really pick the best project for not only your organization, but for the children and family and the federal government. And then the operating cost, we always need to make sure that the budgets are going to demonstrate that the recipient is capable of paying for their project, is capable of paying for any ongoing cost. So just because you have a great idea, we also need to understand that that great idea is going to be something you can sustainably support on an ongoing basis, because as we all know, the Head Start budgets are tight. And Heather, you want to hit on the 2?
Sure. The 2 that are programmed, the first is around use plans. So plans, 1303.44A3 says that plans and specifications for a facility need to include square footage, structure type, number of rooms, how the facility will be used, whether there's going to be space for outdoor play and parking. I would say honestly, like some of the bigger questions we have on this is around the shared use of space. So thinking about making sure, a lot of times we'll get a request in that they'll say, oh, well, we're planning on sharing the facility with, another agency, or maybe even with, multiple programs within our existing organization are going to be using the space. But then there's no cost allocation for the facility. And so, but there's like this expectation that Office of Head Start will pay for the entire thing. So that's not something that we have the ability to entertain, which a lot of times will require some back and forth. The other one, a lot of time, and still under the same requirement, is around the building specifications. So that we need the actual building plans itself to show what size of facility, how it's going to be used, but then also the site plan, which shows where the facility will be on the land itself, and how you're able to demonstrate, landscape features like the requirements for playground and parking lots, and that those pieces are met as well, not just the plans itself. The other one is in phase 1, the environmental studies, that we do require a phase 1 environmental site assessment that talks about the land itself. These are pretty extensive reports that come in. A lot of times we'll have back and forth where Recipients will send us just the executive summary and not the full report. We need to actually see the full report. And sometimes it's in excess of 300 pages, and that's okay. We do need to see the whole thing. But then two, a lot of times we'll see reports come in where there are recognized environmental conditions that have been identified, but then have not been addressed by the recipient as part of the application. Things like if there's asbestos that's been identified in a facility, you have to explain and then be able to plan and budget for what is going to happen in the construction process or renovation process to mitigate the asbestos that was found. Or, we've had some that have come back and we've had to ditch plans altogether because the soil wasn't appropriate to be able to build on the land. So, I think that these are things too, but it's really, really important that you don't just have to get the phase 1 environmental site assessment, but that there is follow-up if there are recognized environmental conditions that were identified. Like there's an expectation that we have to do follow through on those big things.
You ready for a couple of questions, or
I think there's more than a couple, it seems.
yeah. I'll do the easy ones first, okay?
Only the easy ones, Anne. Only the easy ones.
I think you both referenced some fillable forms and some resources to help programs fill out to meet all the 1303 requirements. Is it possible that you could send us the links to those and we could include it with the slide deck and the presentation when we send it out? Because I think a lot of people don't know where to find those things. So I think, or maybe it's new news too. So is that possible?
Absolutely.
All right, fantastic. I think this one is probably pretty easy too. Someone submitted a 1303 app earlier in the game and it wasn't funded because there weren't sufficient funds. Would that program have to resubmit now? Or what happens if something was not previously funded because there just wasn't the money?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good point, because phase 3, like if there is, like as Stephanie was mentioning, phase 3 is you're coming in and you're asking for either additional funds for increased cost to your existing project, or maybe you're asking for funds to start the project from inception. The phase 3 process, I think we said 30 to 60 days or something like that for phase 3 on average. It can be significantly longer depending on funds availability. So, we may have everything in order, but if there are no funds to support it, like the Office of Head Start doesn't get a magic pot of money at the beginning of every year, or Congress doesn't appropriate funds specific to facility projects. It is the only way the Office of Head Start has funds available is through an offset process. So if we end up offsetting money or having funds available from other means by which we do not use those funds for ongoing operations, that gives us a little bit of money potentially closer to the end of our federal fiscal year to be able to support these projects. So we'll generally see more of our facility projects getting approved probably like August, September timeframes, when we do have funds availability, if there was requests specifically made for that. Now, if it doesn't get approved now, doesn't mean we're not going to have funds in the next fiscal year. It just would depend on the size of the project. It would depend on funds availability. If we're under a CR, that usually draws things out a little bit longer if we don't have an actual approved budget from Congress.
Does a local program have to say, hey, I didn't get funded last year, my application is still in the queue, are you going to consider it? Or how does it get sort of re-upped for the next fiscal year?
We have an ongoing running, like every region has an ongoing running list of all of their facility applications. And so I don't think it needs to get re-upped. Yes, your application is sitting in the Head Start Enterprise System. It may or may no longer be in the budget period for which you're operating, but that's okay. What happens is, like, once we actually have funds available and that we're able to approve the application and fund it, then we will move that application to the correct budget period. Like the Head Start Enterprise System is really great. Like they can push a couple buttons and move it to the right period, and then we can move it forward for funding. So I don't want people to go through an exhaustive process of like pulling down their application, re-upping their application. Like it can move very easily with the help of our help desk. So if we are ready and able to fund, don't worry about where it's actually located in HSES. We'll take care of that, and there wouldn't be any reason to re-up their request. We know which ones are out there and pending.
I fully agree with that. I'm sorry, I fully agree with what Heather's saying. Don't have your specialist make you resubmit the application. I will say though, there might be questions, like if you are submitting today, we're not going to be able to fund you this, federal fiscal year. So maybe like a year in the future. Hopefully if 11 months have passed, we may be not needing new information because the appraisal is good for 3 years and the phase one we say is good for a year. So that's what Belinda used to say. I think that was more of just an OHS discussion, but we might come to you for clarification points on it to just make sure that you can still do the project at this amount. Are you still confident in this budget? So we may come to you to just make sure it is okay, because phase 3 is full of subject matter experts who are going to scrutinize the application. So you might get clarification questions, but I fully agree, do not resubmit an entire application in a new year.
One tip that might help for folks is the time, like there's a timeline for a project. I strongly encourage programs to not specify a date and I'm going to start my project October of 2022. Well, if there wasn't funds available and you didn't get any money in October of 2022, and let's say funds become available in January, you're going to end up having to redo your timeline. I encourage programs to say, upon issuance of the notice of award, it's going to take me 60 days to close if I'm buying a facility, and then it's going to take me another 60 days to secure bids for the project. I think if you block it out in chunks of time as opposed to setting a date and a time, that's an easier timeline to understand, and it flows with the project, and it moves regardless of when it's actually awarded.
So are we ready to move on? We're going to get a little bit more hot. So this is an interesting question. Do we need a 1303 if we spend $250,000 with child care relief funds? Or I'm assuming this is not Head Start funding.
I recommend that you ask that funding source for their requirements around that.
So okay, that's a good point. You see, I'm sure you have both seen a couple of comments, and I think this is what we hear sort of, I think when we're out in the community talking to grantees. I've been in phase 2 for 2.5 years. I've been in phase 3 for 5 years or 4 years. So at that point, maybe these are ones that you'd say, hey, let's have an individual, let's follow up on that. But it sounds like something shouldn't be stuck in phase 2 for that length of period, or does that happen? I think that's where kind of the frustration, and I think to sort of add maybe just another layer of complexity. Heather, you just said that you'd prefer not to say this is the implementation date, but upon issuance of the grant award. Some of the projects for some local programs are leveraging other funds, which don't have a forever date. So in those cases, so we got the people just saying, we're stuck and no one's talking to us, or hey, we're leveraging other funds. This is really good for the federal government if we can do that. Can you expedite our situation? So kind of two separate questions, but I think both probably echo some of the frustration, that I know you are all aware of. So any thoughts on those two?
I understand and recognize that there are concerns and issues, and I think it's so dependent on the specific application request. So like, as Stephanie was saying, if it takes a recipient a really long time to follow up and get certain documentation, then of course, when we're looking at the application again in its entirety, some of the other things may be there may be some things that expire. So it may lead to longer times depending on how long different provisions take in order to satisfy us in being able to move forward with meeting, okay, so we met this regulation, but now this thing over here is now no longer good. So we've got to update this. So that extends the time frame. And then, it's just like a trickle effect. And we have to look at the entire package as an entire application. So it's not like we can just, okay, this part's good now, and we can do this part here now, and this part, it's not a piecemeal thing. It's a one thing, and it's a complete package. So I think that's that complicates things, and it's hard
Can I add
to say.
to that too? Can I add to what you're saying? Yeah, because we were talking about this. I think that's why we need that solid 1303 application submit. Is Heather saying? Don't think you have like 9 of the items right, and then 3 okay, and some stuff might be incorrect, but maybe I'll get it through. Because the problem with that becomes is it is a complex application to review. So if you're submitting it to the regional office, where traditionally these are more complex. So, we try and review in 30 days, but it might take a little longer in these instances to get back to you. During that review, we will review it and we will have our comments and we will send it back to you. When, we're dependent on how fast you're willing to work on it and bring it back to us. Also, when it comes back at that point, we're not just looking at like the 3 items that were okay and then the 9 that were incorrect. What we're looking at that time is now the whole application package again. So your recipients don't do themselves any favors by submitting an incomplete 1303, 44, and 45 application.
So I think that's a good point, because what we have heard often is, I don't understand, we submitted, the application, we got 3 questions, we answered those 3 questions, then they asked questions about things that we had submitted previously. So I think you're kind of saying, when it's incomplete and you submit some more information, we're looking at it in its totality. And I think that's probably a hard thing for folks to comprehend, is to like, well, if I had 7 out of 10 right, why are you going back and commenting on the 7? But I think you gave us sort of the position and the perspective of how you deal with that information.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, Anne, is this goes back to even just our regular refunding applications. So it's like, okay, we have our program and grant specialists to generally review the application. So, and that's who's looking at the 1303 applications as well. They're not experts, they're the same grants and program specialists that you're looking at all your other applications too, which is why we have the special consultants that are there to help. But there are also, your regional program manager, their grants management office that are looking at these too. And so they're looking at, so you may have answered the questions that your grants and program specialists have asked, but then it gets to other folks who are looking at the complete application, and Stephanie may see something that maybe the grant specialist didn't identify. I may see something that the program specialist didn't identify. So yeah, we are potentially asking questions that maybe didn't come up in the original application submission, but it is something that is spotted depending on who is looking at the entire application. And it does go through multiple layers of review. So certainly, it's hard to say, and part of it is, it's about efficiency. So we could all look at it all at the same time, but then we're all stepping all over each other and identifying the same thing. So really the idea and intent is that hopefully it's moving along, the application is improving, and that we're moving closer and closer to a fundable application.
So I'd like to do a time check, because I know you've got some other, but we do have important questions here that we don't want to ignore. But how are we doing on time, Gretchen? And can we spend a few more minutes here? Do we need to move on and then try to catch these at the end?
I think, Anne, if we just have 1 or 2 simpler questions, and then be able to move on and catch those at the end, if that's possible.
Thanks, Gretchen. I think this is a simple question. Is equipment including installation, which may go over the 250,000, also applicable to the 1303 requirements?
No, by definition, like modular comes into my mind, but then if you're classifying your modular as equipment, it wouldn't go through. Oh, well, actually the equipment would, the modular would, that goes through the 1303. So yes, because of that information memorandum that talks about modular units, in that case, yes, it would go through the 1303. If it is, installation, so I guess maybe a playground, I guess it would depend on your accounting records. And do you like an HVAC exam? So HVAC is going to be the same thing I'd say about playground, right? So it depends how you classify that in your accounting records. Are you taking the HVAC and it is a piece of equipment, like on your equipment register that you're depreciating in that kind of manner? And again, actually, I think I say this later, 75.2 gives you the definition of equipment. And capital expenditures. We do talk about that later. This maybe, no, Anne, I don't think this one is that simplistic. Not to me. Okay. But then even just to finish it up, it depends how you're classifying it, because some recipients do classify it as, it will be an improvement to the building, which then, yes, could put you in, if it's an improvement to the building and it's over 250,000, now it's a 1303 because that's being, now it's a major renovation to real property. So I urge you to look at your, accounting records, your accounting policies and procedures and the way you classify things. Look at Part 75 and the definitions, and then reach out to your grant specialist for clarification on your particular case.
Okay, thank you. So the last question on this, and we'll try to then clean up at the end. I think another thing that's confusing probably to the field, if I'm not asking for any money, new money, right? Maybe it's just I want to shift some money around my current budget, but I'm not asking you for any more. It's just a budget amendment under 1303. Or maybe I'm doing something that's not going to cost any of it. I'm doing a big bill that's not going to cost the federal government any more money. I'm going to be using some ongoing operational monies to support the project over time. But I think folks will say, well, if we're not asking for additional money, new money, we still go through phase 1, 2, and 3.
So that's a tricky question, because it really depends on those specific factors that we talked about earlier. So that, as Stephanie was saying, there are some instances whether you're using, whether you're not asking for new money or not, there are still some things that require phase 3 considerations, which will add time to the actual request. There are some instances where it could be a simple, we asked for $600,000 for a major renovation. It's for a facility that we already own. And it's, we give you maybe some money as part of I'm thinking about duration startup monies, or maybe early Head Start childcare partnership monies that we were able to award as part of startup. And we conditioned an award to say that you can't use those funds until we have a complete 1303. In those instances, they are, potentially reviewed and approved at the regional office. But if there are instances where you are meeting one of the factors that require approval outside the regional office, that's not something that we have the ability to expedite. And it is something that we would have to go through the approval process, regardless of whether or not you're asking for additional funds. So that's why we included both of those caveats under the additional factors in phase 3.
What two really jump out at me is meeting that are if you want to use ongoing funds or budget revised funds to like a mortgage in support of some kind of encumbrance or like a note or whatever kind of financing you're doing to pay for a place. And the second one that jumps out at me are capital leases, finance leases. So again, there's an information memorandum, I think it's 1905 on capital leases and finance leases. And that also may trigger that phase 3, even though you're just using existing money in your budget.
So there are a couple of other good questions, but we'll try to get to them at the end, okay? Because I know you've got other important things to cover. I think, Gretchen, that's your cue. We can move on, right?
Yeah, I'm moving on. I'm sorry, Anne. I lost my mute for a second. Thank you. So now I'm going to talk about some post-award amendments. The most common post-award amendments we usually see are triggered by the Uniform Guidance 75308B. So when I discuss all these, and Heather has some too, when we discuss these, please note that a complete application includes an SF424, an SF424A, an SF424B. Those governing board or tribal council meeting minutes supporting that SF424 approval, policy council approval and minutes, and then the program and budget narratives. So if we want to just start digging into some of the examples, I did want to say, and I know I mentioned this earlier, but I do want to reiterate, these level of budget revisions are usually less complex than 1303s. And if you haven't heard from your regional office in 30 days, it really should be the grants management specialist's responsibility to review it in the 30 days. Please feel comfortable reaching out to your grants management officer to identify you haven't heard one way or another. Sometimes the old school recipient or the joke used to be, no news is good news, but no news is really no news. And the longer it sits, it could be bad news. So just kind of moving on, we already talked about, it's here in writing. So it's good for everyone. The $250,000 or 25%, it's $250,000 basically for every Head Start grantee. I know we talked earlier about the uniform guidance has, a stricter threshold, but we use this grants policy statement threshold. And then I know I took us into the weeds with capital expenditures and equipment. So I urge folks to read 45 CFR 75.2, which are the definitions to the uniform guidance. And in there, you'll see the definition of a capital expenditure, capital improvement, equipment, and it talks about because those all require prior approval. As an audience member said, not all of them require 1303, but some of them might require a 1303. So read those definitions, make sure you're well versed, look at your own, accounting policies and procedures to make sure you're getting that right. So the narrative must address the availability of funds and the proposed use of the funds. And kind of going along the same thing, submissions must occur at least 30 days prior to the end of the budget period. As I talked about, that 30-day deadline is usually, a review time period. But, preferably we do like to see it earlier. And what that does is it gives the opportunity for the regional office to give you that analysis and customer support you deserve. So if you're submitting it toward the end and we're racing, you might feel like we're racing, and that's because we are. So the earlier it comes in and the more time we have to address these issues, I think it's a better customer service experience for everyone.
Stephanie, there was a specific question related to the 250, so if we could just jump in there.
Sure.
We recently received training. Well, we received a training recently that I guess said the 250,000 was not applicable to larger grants, and it sounds like that's not the case. But then, so when does the 10% come into play?
For Head Start, well, it wouldn't, because even in that uniform guidance definition, it says it's the simplified acquisition threshold or the 10%. So the simplified acquisition threshold is $100,000. So that's more restricted than the one that we're talking about on this slide in the grants policy statement. I am not aware. Again, it could be a different grant program. I'm not aware. Heather, no?
So 250,000 is the highest you can push it, correct, without a budget revision?
And that's grants people. And Heather has this mind too. I'm thinking now the COVID flexibilities, though, if you are moving it to prepare for, recover from, I forgot the other one, COVID, you would have the opportunity to respond to. You would have the opportunity to move up to $1 million.
Lots of nuances. This is tough. It's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so our next budget revision that we commonly see is, and we talked about it earlier, the non-federal match waivers. So as Heather said, I am extremely supportive, recipients, please, while the flexibility is in place, please, when you are submitting that, non-competing that's a nuance too, right? It's a non-competing continuation. It's the COLA, it's the new funds. You have this flexibility, utilize it. We know you need to be focusing on so many other things. You can, and you have that opportunity available to you now. You can utilize it. Caveat to NCN, so if you're non-competing new, you won't be able to take advantage of the flexibility. Even in regular circumstances, if you have forgotten to submit or you thought you were going to meet the match, you would have the opportunity to apply for one later. In accordance with Section 640B of the Head Start Act. There's 5 reasons you can outline in there. Recipients should apply for a waiver as soon as it is discovered that the program is at risk of not meeting the non-federal match. Do not wait till the end of the budget period for the same reasons as every other application type. Approval cannot be assumed. So that was a question before too. Approvals come in the form of a notice of award. You need something signed by your regional program manager and your grants management officer. If it's not approved, there might be time before the end of the budget period to work with your regional office to meet that, non-federal match. And then, we always want to make sure that recipients are aware that you need to document non-federal match at the same level you would document your federal expenditures. So beware that all matching contributions have to be verifiable by your records.
Time for 2 more questions before you move off that slide?
If you think it's appropriate at this point, yeah, I can tackle them.
And I think you may understand this probably better than I do, but must regional offices be compliant with the 30-day prior to end of the budget period, or can they require it greater than the 30 days prior to the end of the period?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the person to be a little bit more.
Actually, I think I understand. I think I understand. So Stephanie, basically can the regional office require applications for budget revisions due before 30 days? Can they impose stricter provisions?
Recipients are always free to apply for what recipients want. So it is your job to apply for it, and then it is our job to review that and give you a decision based on our regulations, policies, procedures. So unless there would be some reason, like, again, I hate to give blanket statements, but I'm thinking how like appropriations expiring and we need to, there might be these one-off circumstances as to why you were asked to submit something, maybe urgently or differently than I'm describing right now. So I don't want the person asking the question to think, something was done wrong. There may be nuances involved, but, again, I always like to say that recipients are free to apply for what they would like to apply for, and it becomes the responsibility of the program and grants management specialist to make recommendations, and then for the regional program manager and grants management officer to approve or disapprove.
Thank you.
So with carryover balances, we wanted to just clarify the positioning of what is, approvable for a carryover balance and what would not be. So an unobligated balance remaining from funds in one budget period can be carried over to a subsequent or another budget period in that project period. So when recipients have the opportunity to use their carryover funds to add to that approved budget. Like all other expenditures, the carryover request needs to include only allowable, reasonable, allocable, necessary items that align with your existing budget. So I just wanted to, dig into this one a little more and say that we've seen these requests. So I do want to clarify, you cannot move the money between different grant numbers. So even, maybe that's the reason you want to consider consolidation. I'd love for that. But if you have separate grant numbers, you cannot take one unobligated balance from one and move it to another. And even if you did then choose to consolidate later, you still cannot take that money and put it in the new grant. So once it is awarded to that grant number, it's going to have to stay in that grant number. So applications are accepted for a carryover. It's one of the HSES application amendment types. And in there, a recipient needs to explain why the unobligated balance exists, an explanation of how the funds will be used in the current budget period. And remember, it needs to be for a previously approved item. So you want to be reviewing your previous applications and notices of awards and see what your agency has been approved for during the grant number, because the carryover needs to, align with that. It should be easy, again, the simplest ones that probably go the quickest, or if you have, a notice of award that specifically addressed remarks for that item, that carryover is probably, easier to get to an approvable state than one that is a little less overt. So the carryover must be for prospective costs. It's not to reimburse yourself. It's for things that you want to spend in that budget period. If you're not staying aligned with the existing project period approvals, then it's considered, you're changing the scope of that. And I hate to use the word Head Start because I know it's very loaded, but it has a more general term in grants management. But it is considered, a change from what you were previously approved and cannot be approved. So you need to make sure like you have maybe a budget revision or somewhere that you have that approval. Also too, I like to say that we also will be asking for an explanation of how the funds will be used in that current budget period. We'll want to see the budget and understand how they will be in support of the existing budget. Understanding the impact if the carryover is disapproved. So why is this something that really is necessary and needed and not just being asked to be in the new budget period because you had funds left over? An explanation or a waiver for the increased match requirement. And then I'd already mentioned the last one. So I did want to make a plug here. One of the things that we try and do is review the payment management system. We'll definitely for a carryover be looking to see that you have submitted your budget period's final financial, I would say financial status report. That's 2012 federal financial report 425, and using the numbers there and the breakdown of the common accounting number balance to execute the carryover.
Would you like some questions or you want to continue?
I mean, I love questions. If you can't tell, I'm a talker, so I'll take the questions if people want them to be answered.
Okay, so in listening to the carryover balance of unobligated funds, it seems very clear, what it has to be tied to. So if I am in a budget period and I'm in my 9th month, I know that I have funds that I'm not going to spend. There's something we really want to do. I'm not sure I can do it within that remaining 3 months. Could I submit a budget amendment or a budget revision request within that project period? And if approved, then those funds could then be carried over to accomplish what I got approval for. It could be in the 8th month of that 12-month grant period. Is that something that is okay?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's an important strategy that people ought to be mindful of. The other thing, and we've got a couple of comments about this, whether it has to do with capital expenditures, quotes, people are, and I think we've seen this of late, they submitted something with quotes, and when the approval comes in, costs have increased significantly. We saw that a lot around the supply chain. So I think folks are saying, I got approval and now we're going to go purchase it. It's the quotes that we had no longer are valid for good reason. If we have the money, we could, or could we get money? So what do you do when people submit something, a justification, and when it's approved, find out, you know what? You can't get it for that cost anymore.
So I guess just it's something we hear. Recipients are not required to submit quotes. That's the first. Quotes are very nice and they're a great way to justify how much you're requesting, but we do not need quotes. You follow your recipients, follow their procurement procedures, which must align with Part 75, but that is not our job to look at. We need something to support that it's reasonable, allocable, and necessary to the grant. And that is not specified as a quote. So they can use other methods, which then may make it less restrictive to what they're requesting from us and what we can award, I would say is the first thing. And I would say, the second part to that, it gets in these circumstances, in these times, it's complicated. And if you do want to spend more money on an item, you would probably have to come in for a budget revision in that year to then increase the cost that you want to contribute to that item. So this is a place, and Heather and I both strongly agree on this about remarks. You need to read the remarks that are attached to your NOAA, and you need to see what is approved and at what amount. So there might be instances where you wanted to, buy, a certain number of computers or laptops, unfortunately, sometimes people put it on there, 24 MacBooks at this price, each one costing this. That is a pickle, but, hopefully you'd like to see remarks that say things like, what do you always call them, Heather? What is your, you call it technology or something, right?
I couch everything as technology. Your installation of your internet, your notebooks, your tablets, the iPhones, whatever that is, technology.
Yeah, but if your NOAA is very restrictive, and it can be, you are going to have to come in for an approval for the increased cost. And you can do that through revising existing funds within your budget. That would be, so here's your prior approval. Maybe you do need maybe that would be an instance. I need to carry over money from this year because now I have an increased cost in this other year for this item you've previously approved. So it's never simple. And you have to recipients need to look at their budget and find ways to then, or apply for additional one-time funds, which are less, obviously less likely than, or less available, or, than being able to revise or carry over your own funds.
Thank you.
So I'm going to move ahead then. There is another type of revision called a change in scope, and it's defined in our uniform guidance under 75-308. It talks about a change in the scope or the objective of the project or the program, even if there is no associated budget revision requiring prior written approval. So I think folks are probably more familiar with what we call a change in scope in our amendment types within a Head Start Enterprise system. We've got things like a conversion request, an enrollment reduction, if you're adding or removing a program option, if you're asking for a locally designed option waiver, consolidations, any other program changes, like if I want to add a delegate agency, all of those are considered to be or fall under the change in scope requests. I would say things to make note of is that change in scope requests can be submitted at any time, either within a baseline application or through that amendment process. But that you really should be thinking about and identifying an implementation date for your change in scope or for when you want to make those changes, and then try to figure out then a time frame for which the application is submitted. So for example, a program that is expecting to implement a change in scope, like an enrollment reduction or a conversion request at the beginning of the next school year, would need to be considering submitting that request in early springtime. So you've got enough time for us to review the request, respond to the request, and get you that response so you have time to implement before the start of the school year. The other thing too is programs should be thinking about, particularly as we're talking about change in scope, identifying an implementation date that causes the least amount of disruption to service delivery and specifically the children and families. So we're talking about enrollment reduction where there's a possibility of impacting existing children. We would want you to wait until that school year finishes, and through attrition or through graduation of children into another program, then we could consider those types of changes. So I think the key thing here is that we really want to encourage you to talk and engage with your regional office. Your program specialist can help you in thinking about and deciding on implementation date and help you navigate the type of application you need to submit, whether it's best to submit through baseline or as an amendment, or specifically how soon you should be thinking about getting those applications in prior to implementation. There are other things too, as programs are thinking about and trying to respond to changes in community need that don't always need to be able to, or always require prior approval. So we did identify a few things here on the, on the slide to talk about things you can do without coming in for prior approval. Like, so thinking about shifting slots between your existing approved program options. So if you're approved for center-based, home-based, and family childcare, you can shift slots between those options without coming in for prior approval, assuming that it would not be a discontinuation of an existing option. If you're asking to discontinue an option altogether, then you would need to come in for prior approval. but basically you're going to need to check your notice of award to figure out what it is that you're approved for in your programs. And then also shifting slots within your designated service area on the notice of award. So if I'm approved for 5 counties and one of my counties really has reduced population and I'm not able to serve children or as many children as I once was in a particular county, I can shift those slots into other counties, like so that you've got the flexibility to be able to do that in your award. But I think really highlighting on before you make changes, you're going to want to make sure that you're still in compliance with the performance standards. You're going to want to make sure that your changes are based on community need, specifically making sure that you have an updated community needs assessment that is an agreement, and that any change still aligns with your current budget. So you don't want to make changes that have a budgetary implication if you can't still live within your existing budget, because we don't have any funds to just award additional increases for you to operate at higher funding levels. So again, really encouraging ongoing dialogue with your regional office on that.
I did have one quick question that came in, Heather. So if you want to move home-based visiting slots to center-based, all in early Head Start, you can do that without prior approval?
Yes, assuming that it has a $0 impact on your budget. So typically what happens in those requests is a program is moving from home-based to center-based, but the cost is substantially higher to operate, and that the region or that the recipient then needs to come in and ask for a reduction in the number of children that they serve in order to be able to accomplish that change, which is an enrollment reduction. But if a program is able to do it within their existing budget, and you're not discontinuing one of your options altogether, then certainly you have the ability to do that. But want to make note of the impact on the budget that change could have. So in thinking about, just generally, again, the enrollment reductions conversions. And so I know that we continue to hear regularly that we anticipate a big increase, particularly as we continue to recover from COVID and just in our communities and things that, we anticipate an increase in the number of change in scopes that we are getting. But just so you know, here from September 21 to September 2022, nationally, we're looking at a total of 90 enrollment reductions that we entertained and approved, and then 68 Head Start to early Head Start conversions. And you'll see there the primary reasons, but I would say, again, making sure that you go back and you take a look at it and make sure you're responding to your existing community needs and that you're meeting that. But I want to go through, because I think the next slide is really important to talk about the processing of all of our post-award amendments. So here, you'll see here that generally our post-award processing takes anywhere from like 30 to 120 days. And you'll see there that, Stephanie covered something simple like an easy budget revision for an item of equipment may take generally 30 days on average. The ones where I was talking about your big change in scopes that really require a deeper analysis on our part really take a much longer 120 days on average to review and respond. So really making sure that, and it goes through the process of program and specialist and grant specialist review, management review, and then we can either, we can generally process the action. Sometimes requests may need concurrence with central office, specifically those change in scopes. So, Anne, I realize that we are really short on time at this point. We have a little bit more, but I feel like if you want, maybe we could, I feel like the teacher qualification waivers would take the entire rest of our time. And so I maybe want to skip over this particular part. And if we want to schedule another time to talk about teacher qualifications, we can. I do think that it's super important, as we're talking with Stephanie and we have her here, that we cover the closeout stuff.
Correct. Okay. And I've been thinking for the last half hour that we definitely need to schedule another event like this, because I think it's so helpful, and I'm learning or relearning things that I had forgotten that are really important. So yes, yes, yes.
Great.
Yeah, we can hit the next slide, right? Yeah, so recipients with available balances for a budget period that ended 2021 December 31st, 2021 or earlier, you probably received the ACF unilateral closeout letter. And that came from Ben Goldhaber and Dr. Sandra Webb. And this is an initiative from our Deputy Secretary to close out these awards by the end of 2022. So we are going into our last quarter to accomplish that. Just so you do know, in the backlog that we have, the Head Start's up to about 70%. So we are on pace to meet that. Of course, the most complex ones are left for the end. But we did want to let you know some actions have been taken. You've probably seen closeout awards coming to your agency. But on larger balances, larger balances and recipients that we know have projects, we've been able to hold off on those. But as I mentioned, we are really looking at a December 31st, 2022 deadline to close out all of those budget periods. So I urge you, although we are not taking immediate action, I do urge you to be working. If you have a balance and you want to use it and keep it available to yourself, you're going to have to be working with your regional office to get like a carryover approved. So now it's in the current year funding. If you had money and you require a no cost extension, that would also, delay your, budget period, project period past that 12/31/2021 deadline. You would have, the money still less scrutinized. And then there's also the ability for liquidation extensions. If you have obligated your funding, but haven't had the ability to pay out on those obligations yet. What you probably have seen is we are wrapping up our closeouts for funding that was provided with federal fiscal year 17 funds. Those all should be done by today. So I think that's it. I know I do feel unfortunate because I feel like the letters may have scared folks. That wasn't the intention. It's just to notify you everything I have just talked about.
So is that the closeout, the closeout?
It is, but there are a couple things, Anne, that I want to be careful of and just make sure, like, as Stephanie was saying, like, there are things that we want to make sure we make sure we hammer home and make sure you take away from is that be prepared, have a plan for spending your COVID funds. We didn't really talk specifically about that, but as we are getting closer and closer to the end of the period of availability for those funds, like, we want to make sure that you have a justification and a planned use for the funds. Budget revisions, as we talked about, we talked about the time frame. Yes, you can submit it up to the last day of the period, but that's really not going to get you the opportunity for us to respond in a timely manner to those budget revisions. So you really need to make sure that they get submitted prior to the end of budget period with enough time for us to be considerate and get your response when you need it. And then be prepared for like the carryover request, as Stephanie was talking about. If you're the minute that you're submitting a 425 report that has unobligated funds and you want to be able to use that in a future period, you should be simultaneously submitting a carryover application at the same time to show that your intent is to plan to use those funds so that we don't take those or assume that there's no plan in the future to use them and we take them away in the closeout process. So all of this stuff does require a bit of time and thought on this.
Well, I know that we are running out of time, and I think we got to a lot of questions, but we are committed. I know both Stephanie and Heather are committed to following up on some of those remaining questions. I think there's some that actually we know what the answers are because it's been issued by OHS and can save you a particular question that they issued. The answer's already been issued. But my takeaway from this is complicated business. I'm listening to, all the nuances, and I think about all the information that directors are expected to sort of carry around and kind of know all the answers all the time. And some of these things are standard operating procedures. Some of them are things that you don't do every day. So to the extent that we so appreciate, NHSA so appreciates your willingness to come on. I think that these are so helpful. I wish that we had time to do the teacher qualifications today, but I think we can promise the community that we can talk about scheduling something very quickly. And I think there are even more deeper dives in the change of scope, particularly around color reductions, and the compensation issues. But, so good to have Stephanie. So glad that you were willing to do it. And Heather, always a pleasure. And I just wish we had more time. But, here we are, and we're just going to go to part 2. Stay tuned, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne, and stay safe out there, and all my friends in Florida. Thank you.
I say thank you for having me, inviting me. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you.